Imagine sitting around with your friends, fingers on the Ouija board, when it spells out your name, followed by the words, "I'm here for you." These are 7 Ouija board experiences that turn terrifyingly real. Brace yourself. One cold October night, a group of friends gathered in Matt's basement for a bit of Halloween fun. The basement was dark, musty, and had the perfect creepy atmosphere for ghost stories. Amidst the laughter and Halloween snacks, Matt pulled out an old Ouija board that he had found in his grandmother's attic. They all took turns inspecting it, some laughing nervously, others genuinely intrigued. Most of them thought Ouija boards were just a novelty, a party trick, but that night would prove them wrong. They decided to dim the lights and place a single candle in the middle of the table. When they placed their fingers on the planchette, Sarah, one of the more skeptical friends, mockingly asked, "Is anyone here with us?" The planchette didn't move, and everyone laughed, calling her out for scaring the ghosts away. But then, as they started asking more questions, the planchette began to slide slowly across the board, spelling out S C R E A M. They all exchanged nervous glances, half thinking someone was playing a prank, but each of them insisted they weren't moving it. They hesitated, but Matt's curiosity got the better of them. He asked the board, "What do you mean, scream?" At that moment, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the far corner of the basement, so loud it rattled the walls. They were frozen, every hair on their bodies standing up as they tried to comprehend what was happening. The scream didn't just fade, it grew louder, echoing around the room as if it were coming from all directions at once. Their hearts pounded as they scanned the basement, desperately looking for an explanation. One by one, they scrambled to their feet, knocking over the Ouija board as they dashed up the stairs. They locked themselves in Matt's room, still shaking from the experience. They debated what could have caused it, a hidden speaker, a prank by someone else, but deep down, they all knew there was no rational explanation. That scream had sounded too real, too close, and somehow too personal. Days turned into weeks, but the screams seemed to follow them. Matt and his friends each reported hearing a faint, ghostly shriek late at night, no matter where they were. Even now, some of them refused to talk about it, afraid that mentioning it might bring the scream back, louder and closer than before. Evan was a skeptic by nature. He had always been fascinated by the supernatural, but he believed it was all myths and superstition. So, when one of his friends brought out a Ouija board during a sleepover, he jumped at the chance to prove once and for all that it was just a game. He sat cross-legged on the floor, rolling his eyes as his friends dimmed the lights and put on eerie background music. They all placed their fingers on the planchette and started asking questions. Evan, eager to expose the trick, asked, "Is anyone here with us?" The planchette jerked towards yes. Evan laughed, but his friends insisted they weren't moving it. Intrigued, he continued, "Who are you?" The board slowly spelled out, "I like you, Evan." The group laughed nervously, but Evan's smile faded. He thought one of his friends must have been messing with him. But as the night went on, the answers grew stranger. The board told Evan things only he would know. Details about his childhood, his secrets, things he'd never told anyone in the room. Shaken, he decided to end the session, convinced that someone was just playing a prank. But that night, Evan lay awake, unsettled. A cold chill seemed to cling to his room, and in the corner of his eye, he thought he saw something, a shadow, just at the foot of his bed. He turned on his light, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. For the next few nights, Evan began to notice things out of place in his room. items moved, doors creaking open by themselves, and then the shadow returned. The figure became a nightly visitor, lurking in the corners, sometimes whispering Evan's name in a raspy, unnerving voice. It grew bolder, coming closer to his bed, sometimes hovering right above him while he lay paralyzed, unable to move. He tried ignoring it, convincing himself it was just his imagination, but the haunting continued. Desperate, he decided to use the Ouija board alone, hoping to get rid of whatever had latched onto him. He asked the board to leave him alone, to stop haunting him, but it spelled out a single, chilling response: "I'm here to stay." To this day, Evan can still feel that heavy, suffocating presence lurking in the corners of his room, never letting him forget that he's being watched. Sarah and her roommates were looking for a thrill, and they thought a Ouija board would be the perfect way to celebrate Halloween. They laughed, dimmed the lights, and circled around the board, fingers lightly touching the planchette. The session started off lighthearted, and they didn't take it too seriously until they asked the board, "Who are you?" The planchette spelled out the words, "Watch me." They asked what it meant, but the board didn't respond. They continued pressing it with questions until it slowly spelled out, "Look in the mirror." Uneasy, Sarah stood up, laughing nervously as she made her way to the bathroom, thinking it was just a silly trick. She flicked on the light and looked in the mirror, but instead of her own reflection, she saw a woman staring back. This woman had hollow, sunken eyes and a wide, twisted smile that spread across her face in a way that didn't seem human. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with dark circles under her eyes that made her look like she hadn't slept in years. Sarah stumbled back, clutching the sink, and blinked hard, hoping that it was a trick of the light. But when she looked again, the woman was still there, staring directly into her eyes, that wide grin growing larger and more unnatural. She let out a scream, and her roommates rushed in, finding her trembling, staring blankly into the mirror. After that night, Sarah refused to look in mirrors, afraid that the woman might still be waiting for her. She removed every mirror in her home, but to this day, she claims to see that face in any reflected surface, a window, a car door, even in the dark screens of her phone and laptop. It's as if that woman is still watching her, lurking in the background, just waiting for Sarah to let her guard down. At a late-night house party, Katie and her friends decided to use a Ouija board for laughs. They were in the living room, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and soda cans. The music turned down low for a spooky atmosphere. They began asking questions, giggling at the answers as they connected with a spirit who identified himself as Ryan. Ryan seemed friendly, answering their questions with casual responses, even making lighthearted jokes that seemed almost too real. They laughed, but as the session went on, it felt like the board's attention was drawn specifically to Katie. Ryan answered her questions with unusual accuracy, knowing things about her life that only close friends would know. Katie started to feel uncomfortable, but brushed it off, thinking one of her friends was moving the planchette. The next night, however, Katie started receiving phone calls from an unknown number. Every time she answered, there was silence on the other end, or sometimes she could hear faint, indistinct whispering. The calls started happening more frequently, at all hours of the night, until Katie became afraid to answer her phone. Determined to get to the bottom of it, she used the Ouija board again, this time asking if it was Ryan who was calling her. The board's response was simple but chilling. "Still here." She tried throwing the board away, but the calls didn't stop, and she swears that sometimes, in the dead of night, she could still hear someone whispering her name in the shadows of her bedroom. Sam and his girlfriend Emily were a young couple with a taste for the unusual. They often frequented gift shops and collected odd items, so when they found an old Ouija board in the corner of a dusty antique store, they couldn't resist bringing it home. They decided to try it out one rainy night in their small apartment, hoping for a bit of excitement to break up the monotony of the stormy evening. Emily jokingly asked the board, "Is there anyone who wants to talk to us?" The planchet moved almost immediately to yes. At first, they thought it was just random. They asked more questions and laughed at the answers, but then the board spelled out a message that took them both by surprise. "Look under the bed." They froze, glancing at each other in shock. Sam chuckled nervously, trying to shake off his unease, but curiosity got the best of them. Emily leaned over, lifting the bed skirt, and that's when she saw it. A small, cracked porcelain doll, its single remaining eye fixed on her, as if it were watching. It was dressed in an old-fashioned dress that looked frayed and dusty, as though it had been under the bed for years. Neither of them recognized this doll. They had never seen it before, and they had no idea how it could have ended up there. Thoroughly unnerved, they decided to throw the doll away. Sam wrapped it up in a plastic bag and took it down to the dumpster, breathing a sigh of relief as he tossed it in. But that relief was short-lived. The next morning, as they made their bed, they found the same doll lying there, staring up at them with its one eye. Panic set in, and they threw it out again, this time driving to a nearby river and tossing it into the water. Once again, they returned home to find the doll back under the bed. Finally, desperate and terrified, they used the Ouija board again, asking the spirit why the doll kept returning. The board's response was chillingly simple. "She belongs here." Overcome with fear, Sam and Emily left the apartment, abandoning their lease and moving in with family, too afraid to ever return to the place where the doll seemed to claim them as her own. Maria was a young woman who had always been close to her grandmother. They shared a bond that went beyond words. But when her grandmother passed away, Maria was devastated. In her grief, she couldn't seem to let go, clinging to memories and searching for signs that her grandmother was still somehow with her. One night, her friend suggested using a Ouija board to try to contact her. Hesitant but curious, Maria agreed. The session started with the typical questions, and at first nothing happened. But then, Maria asked, "Is there anyone here who knows me?" To her shock, Planchet moved to yes. The others exchanged nervous glances, but Maria felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She took a deep breath and asked, "Who are you?" The Planchet slowly spelled out her grandmother's name. Maria's heart raced, her grief mingling with wonder and fear. She asked, "Why are you here?" And the board replied with a message that made her eyes well up with tears. "I didn't want to leave." As Maria's friends sat in silence, watching the planchet move across the board, Maria felt an overwhelming presence in the room, something warm and familiar. It felt as if her grandmother were truly there, watching over her. She wanted to keep talking, to ask more questions, but her friends ended the session, afraid of opening any dangerous doors. After midnight, Maria started to notice small, comforting signs around her. She would sometimes smell her grandmother's favorite perfume, a soft floral scent that would linger briefly in the air before vanishing. Sometimes she would see small objects in her house that reminded her of her grandmother, things she had no memory of bringing into her home. While it comforted her at first, Maria eventually grew uneasy. She felt as though her grandmother was lingering in the world too long, held back by their shared grief. To this day, Maria sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night, feeling as if she's not alone, as if her grandmother is there, just out of sight, waiting for her to finally let go. On a stormy night, a group of high school friends, looking for a thrill, sneaked into an old abandoned mansion on the edge of town. The place was rumored to be haunted, and the group figured it was the perfect spot for a little ghost hunting. They brought along a Ouija board, laughing and daring each other to reach out to whatever spirits might be lingering in the shadows of the house. The mansion was dusty, with cobwebs draping the old furniture, and the air felt thick and cold. As they gathered in a dilapidated parlor room, they lit a few candles and placed the board in the center of the table. When they placed their fingers on the planchette and asked, "Is anyone here?" the planchette jerked toward yes with a force that took them all by surprise. Their laughter turned nervous as they asked another question. "What do you want?" The board spelled out the word, "Listen." Puzzled, they leaned in, holding their breath, straining to hear anything in the silence. That's when they heard it, a faint, raspy whisper coming from the dark hallway. It was too quiet to make out at first, but as they continued to listen, the whisper grew louder, more distinct, until they could hear the words, "I see you." One of the friends broke the silence, laughing it off his nerves, but the rest weren't so sure. Every time they stopped talking, the voice seemed to get closer, the whisper echoing from different corners of the room. It was no longer faint, it was everywhere. Panicking, they ended the session and scrambled out of the mansion, leaving the board behind. They thought they were safe once they were outside, but for weeks afterward, they claimed to hear that same whisper in random places, at home, at school, even in crowded spaces. It was always the same chilling phrase, "I see you." And though they never returned to that mansion, some of them swear they can still feel eyes watching them from the shadows, as if the spirits they encountered have been following them ever since. They say the Ouija board is just a game, but as you've seen tonight, some games come with consequences. If you dare to open that door, be prepared for what may come through. And remember, some things once seen can never be unseen.